These are some examples of the pond lily leaves which I collected from Bristol Botanical Gardens to use in the making of the pond lily dishes. And here I'm wiring off some stoneware buff clay, which needs to be approximately 800 grams to make one dish. And then it's important to wedge the clay to get all of the air bubbles out, otherwise the dishes can split or crack in the kiln. So this is an important process. And once the clay is wedged, I then form the wedged clay into a ball by tapping it in my hands. Just makes it easier then to roll out using a rolling pin on a wooden surface into a nice round shape. And I usually use wooden slats, but on this occasion 2 magazines to get the appropriate thickness for the piece of clay. Once I've done that, I use a rubber kidney to smooth out the surface where the leaf is then pressed into the clay, so that I get the formation, the impression of the lovely veins, which you can see here. I then use a bowl I actually had at home, which measured just over 22 centimetres in diameter, because I need to allow for the shrinkage. The dishes measure 20 centimetres in diameter once they're complete. And the stoneware clay I use can shrink in total about 2.2 centimetres. So that's why I use that dish as a measurement, if you like, drawing it around the outside of the vein impression. And then, as you saw, I cut around that freehand with the knife. And then it gives me a little bit of margin to use water with my hands to tease out the clay into a lovely fine edge, which is going to then be the rim, as you can see here. I'm then pressing down with one finger and then easing upwards up the sides with my other finger to create a really pretty frilled edge, which is reflected in the real pond lily dishes that you get in the Amazon. So actually these dishes are a kind of a combination of traditional pond lily leaves and the Amazonian leaves you get. And these are the final dishes which I've made. And they're now going to be left to dry for about a week and then put in the kiln. They will be fired to 10-20 degrees bisque firing, done overnight, and then, as you can see here, they come out this light buff colour once they are bisque fired, so they're now hard and much easier to glaze at this stage. So what I then do is I apply a wash of copper oxide. I find that it's easier to apply the copper oxide when the dishes are already a little bit wet, so I tend to wet them first and then water down the copper oxide, letting the water bleed the oxide into the veins. And I use a sponge around the edges and on the back surface for my S logo to allow the oxide to sink into the texture and sometimes wipe off. And then the second stage of the decoration is submerging the dish into the stoneware white glaze, which, as you can see, very quickly goes into a chalky surface when the water has been absorbed by the bisqueware, and I scrape off the base, making sure there is no glaze left on the base for then the second and last firing, which is at 60 degrees centigrade. And then when they come out, they look a beautiful kind of rustic, realistic pond lily green, and you can see that the copper oxide gives a nice toasted edge, and the iron in the stoneware buff clay also brings out a nice speckling with the combination of the glaze. And here we can see Niall Keating, chef at Whatley Manor, placing his beautiful chocolate frogs, which are glistening with gold, onto the dishes.